Welcome to Error451, an occasionally weekly podcast on tech security from an anarchist perspective. I'm your host, Bursts of Goodness. This week we're joined by Pat Boyle from the radical media collective Unicorn Riot. So this may be not the conversation to detail in too much length the great job that y'all at Unicorn Riot have been doing by representing an independent radical position in the media, breaking stories and doing great investigation. But our show notes will point to a number of the podcast interviews that you've done recently where you get to talk about your work. And folks should definitely check out our interview with Pat as well as Wendy from a year ago. Since then, Unicorn Riot has continued with amazing on-the-ground coverage of struggles around the so-called U.S., including in-depth video coverage of A12 in Charlottesville, Virginia, the related analysis and release of the far-right chat logs from over the Discord chat platform that have given a wealth of insight into how the trolls organize, as well as recently released feature-length documentary from Unicorn Riot's time covering the resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is entitled Black Snake Killers, a hashtag no dapple story, and that's available for free at unicornriot.ninja. This year, they've even had interviews from across the pond with autonomous initiatives in Greece. So I want to just send props to y'all for raising the quality bar on independent media and also putting yourselves on the line to get the truth out there. Thanks a lot for doing that. So Pat hasn't been on this podcast, or you haven't been on this podcast, Error451, but you did appear on the Final Straw, as I mentioned before, and I'm excited to have you back on here to chat about cryptocurrencies, in particular Bitcoin and the far-right and alt-right's investment in them. So let's jump into this, if that's cool.
Yeah, so before we start, I just wanted to give a disclaimer that I'm not a computer programmer or a financial expert, and I'm actually fairly new to the realm of cryptocurrencies myself. I do hold a few different cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, and that I wanted to come on here today to just kind of show people and talk to you, Burst, about the different things I found out about what's going on. Things that are maybe a downside, things that are an upside, and maybe talk about ways that, it's affecting social struggles and ways that it's affecting the far right. Yeah,
that sounds awesome.
Was that clear? Or was that random?
No, I think that was totally clear. And I think it's, as you point out, it's really important for people to be able to make informed choices about how they engage with technology based on not just some panacea approach or wide-eyed approach that technology solves problems. Technology complicates issues, and so I want to complicate discussions about technology so that we can make more informed choices. So thanks a lot for bringing that to the table.
Yep, no problem. Yeah, there's a lot of risk involved.
So I'm going to make a statement of ignorance that I've heard about digital cryptocurrencies for years, but I've never really paid attention. I noticed them coming up in the news around campaign donations being untraceable around Citizens United. I was aware that media projects like Submedia were taking them and that anarcho-capitalists seemed really stoked on them. Pat, can you explain what, in general, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are and how they work as you understand?
So Bitcoin is a encrypted digital asset, and most cryptocurrencies are encrypted. That can be used to exchange wealth or to store wealth, but they're encrypted in peer-to-peer. So they exist solely in the digital world.
So what's the purpose of encrypting them?
It's actually a very similar concept to like Signal Messenger app. You have your public key, you have your private key, and you're sending a message. But in this case, you're actually sending a digital asset that is worth something, depending basically on what people have decided it's worth. So it's or like it's a lot like a PGP email. So it's just a way of being able to send it and people being able to receive it. It's written into basically like the code or the blockchain, and that's also what enables it to not have a centralized authority. And Bitcoin specifically doesn't have a centralized authority. That means that there's no bank that issues more Bitcoin when it's in trouble or, when it needs to basically continue to generate more debt. So there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins in existence. Can't be made. And instead of a central bank authorizing or like issuing Bitcoins, they're actually processed by miners. And so there's actually two ways to mine, but one way is to just process transactions, and people do that through, I guess, like software about that, but I know that a lot of people do it.
And I assume that like the hash that's created with the encryption is makes it like non-reproducible, makes it basically
Yeah.
individualized, so you can't just some central, like in the way that a central bank or like the Fed or whatever could go in there and say, all right, like you said, like, oh, we're gonna like bolster the economy. There's inflation right now, so we're gonna pump more Bitcoin into the economy. Those ones are out there, and so people are basically just mining and distributing, getting shares of the existent 21 million Bitcoins when they do exchanges. Is that right?
Yeah. So whenever you transfer any cryptocurrency, it seems you'll pay a small transaction fee when you send it from wallet to wallet, right? Using your public and private keys. So when you do that, the transaction fee actually goes to a miner somewhere. And then the like blockchain or whatever the kind of program is. Not all cryptocurrencies are blockchain technology. There's also smart contracts and another kind of cryptocurrency called Ripple that don't work exactly the same as blockchain technology. Yeah, it's like it also prevents people from counterfeiting them. Like that part I know less about, but basically it's a way to keep it peer to peer, not centralized, in a way to keep like counterfeit like stuff from happening to it.
So, and with the portion that's shaved off of transactions, that's basically paying, like philosophically, that's paying for the infrastructure that allows the wallets to exist in the first place, and the checking that the currencies are in fact valid, right?
Right. And so anyone could do that in theory if you have the hardware. Now, one issue with mining and processing transactions is that, and this isn't the case for all cryptocurrencies, but it is the case for some, and it is the case for Bitcoin, that they have to use special hardware, which takes up more processing power and therefore uses up more power. And so that's a problem. And actually, I've was coming across some information that what it takes to process Bitcoin transactions is more than the power consumption of the entire country of Ireland and like a bunch of other countries. So there is a power problem with that. But that could actually be solved if the Bitcoin community could come together to kind of address those situations. Yeah. So yeah. But there are other cryptocurrencies that anyone could mine from any computer. So it just depends. But yeah, basically, instead of a bank processing the transaction and saying like this transaction happened, it does it automatically on the blockchain, which is basically like an open record of every transaction that's happened. Well, I'll just stick specifically to Bitcoin on Bitcoin. And so you can actually go in and see every transaction that's ever happened on the blockchain. You can search it and look at it openly. And so in that way, Bitcoin isn't truly anonymous, but if you have a wallet and no one knows it's your wallet, then it could be overlooked. But if you let's say you post your Bitcoin send to address, on your social media or your website, then people can just go and look in your wallet on the blockchain and know how much Bitcoin you're holding. Versus like our fiat currency, that whereas basically people just spend, cash or whatever, and it's not open. Like we wouldn't know how much, someone is holding of fiat currency.
Can one person just have one wallet?
Well, so it depends, right? So if you want to buy cryptocurrency, right now the only way I could figure out how to do that was on a website called Coinbase.com, which is had a recent flood of user traffic because of this Bitcoin boom. And they will after you verify your bank account and credit cards with them, you can actually exchange money into a wallet in their exchange. And they only deal in three currencies right now: Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. And they're based out of the UK. So then like that's your wallet, right? But it's actually, they control your keys. So in a way you don't really hold it. You're just basically have an account to your Coinbase account where they have your keys. And so if Coinbase was ever hacked, you could actually lose all your stuff. And so the way that you can avoid that is to either make a paper wallet or to use a hardware wallet where you actually hold your private keys. And so if you hold your private keys, then you actually hold your currency. And in the case of like hardware wallets, there's really only 3 of them available on the market, but you can get those. And they're supposedly these kind of hack-proof looking thumb drives with encryption on there that keeps your keys from ever touching your computer, which could be exposed to malware that could get your stuff stolen. So there's a huge risk just on the security level of Bitcoin as well, just because, you know, if you do one wrong thing, you could be hacked. The other problem with cryptocurrency too is that, and this happens a lot, people send the wrong amount to the wrong wallet. They do screw something up and all of a sudden their currency's gone. You're probably not going to get that back. And so unlike versus like a bank transaction where if you sent that, you could, you know, call your bank and have it reversed. Or, you know, if someone, let's say, stole your credit card number and racked something up, you could contest it and not have to pay that. If someone steals your Bitcoin, there's kind of nothing you can do about it.
I was wondering if it was like the hardware wallet was kind of like a Tails drive where you could just load a clean operating system.
You want to talk about hardware wallets are important to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Can you explain how that works? As far as you know, not being a programmer.
So the best way, in my opinion, and what I've done is I finally purchased a hardware wallet. And basically what it is they're a small device. Some of them just look like thumb drives, and they hold your private keys to your Bitcoin wallets, but some of them actually also do other cryptocurrencies. And what they purport to do is to keep your keys basically on the actual hard drive, your private keys that you wouldn't share publicly. And they keep it away from being hacked. And so there's three different, I could only really find 3 that were kind of available for consumers to use. One's called a Keep Key. Another one's called a Trezor. And the third one is called a Ledger Nano S. And I use the Ledger Nano S. They cost like $70 and you got to order them from France. And it takes like 2 months to get them because they're on back order. But the reason why you want to hold your keys instead of just say, you know, leave your cryptocurrency in some sort of exchange like Coinbase is that could be in theory hacked. Now, Coinbase, I don't think has actually ever been hacked yet, but there's been other very notorious hacks of cryptocurrency exchanges and Bitcoin exchanges. And if that happens, like your stuff could be gone. There's no guarantee that you're going to get that back. So the best way to ensure that you're not going to be hacked is to use a hardware wallet. You can also use paper wallets, or they're called offline wallets. And they actually function similar to a hardware wallet, and that can be done for free. So yeah, but again, every time you're moving something in and out of a wallet, you're going to pay a small transaction fee. So if you're, let's say I went to Coinbase, which is what most first-time users will do, and I would recommend. You go to Coinbase, you purchase some cryptocurrency, and it's in your wallet in Coinbase, right? But now I want to send it to my hardware wallet address. So I got to take my send. In some cases, you can actually store your wallet on your computer, or you can store it on your phone. But those are devices that can be hacked. So basically, you want to either go paper wallet, which is called an offline wallet, or a hardware wallet, which is just basically a slightly more secure version of a paper wallet in a lot of ways. So then like if you go to Coinbase, you buy something at Coinbase, you're going to send it to your other address at your hardware wallet. You're going to pay a small transaction fee with it automatically. It's just like automatically happens when you send anything anywhere from one wallet to the next. And so like if you think about cryptocurrency, it's like in a way you don't really actually hold it. You hold your keys to the cryptocurrency, and the cryptocurrency is just there. It really can't be created or destroyed unless you lost your keys to some, like, let's say Bitcoin. That Bitcoin would be inaccessible forever, but it's still, in a way, it's still there on the blockchain. You could go and look at the blockchain and see it. Just no one could get to it. And so in a way, you don't really hold cryptocurrency. You just hold keys that give you access to that. I don't know if that's like a really weird way to explain
No, that makes
how
sense.
it works, but
So if a massive hack happened and everyone lost access to their keys, could it just be the system just be recreated by the blockchain with a new encryption system sort of thing? Or would everyone just be shit out of luck?
I think it doesn't work. I'm not sure, but I think it doesn't work like that. Like, um, I mean, there are ways to get cryptocurrency recovered, but I know less about that. But blockchain couldn't just return a transaction because like how would it know?
Yeah.
It's basically like a sort of like a program or an algorithm, and then that's what controls the history of like like labeling everything. It's called like an open ledger system, and it's where you can see everything. And so and that's how people have actually been able to find out about how much cryptocurrency the alt right is holding.
So can you talk about why there's been a boom in usage of Bitcoin and e-currencies during this last year? Has there been a change in it, or in general, not just among the far right?
Well, it's kind of hard to say exactly why people have done it. I think part of the reason why people have started to use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is lack of faith in our current financial system. And I think that a lot of people who invest in cryptocurrencies and they wouldn't necessarily call themselves like anarchists or cypherpunks or anything like that are just kind of disillusioned with the banks. A lot of people are upset with the banks. And to some, the argument is that this erodes their power and their ability to manipulate our financial system. Also, there's a lot of potential in a lot of the technologies that are coming out. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say if it's any one thing. I mean, there's a lot that's been going into why this is happening. And I mean, some of it's even just irrational. I mean, markets in the cryptocurrency realm will go up and down based on articles that journalists write. And sometimes those articles aren't even right and people listen to them anyways. And that can affect, the cost of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, you were mentioning before before the conversation we were talking about possible manipulations within the cryptocurrency market, and you were talking about Jamie Dimon. Can you relate that again?
So like cryptocurrency up until the past few weeks, maybe only about 1% of the population really had cryptocurrencies or messed with them. And now that's becoming like two or three. And one of the downsides to this cryptocurrency thing is that it's open to manipulation. So I'll give you an example. There's an exchange in Hong Kong called Bitfinex, and there is a user that could be one person or a group of people called Spoofy. And so there on some of the more advanced trading platforms, there's a way to set what they call limit orders. And so you can basically just set it on that. And what you do is like you take your cryptocurrency out of wherever you were holding it, move it into this exchange, right? Into your wallet that's in your exchange that you now no longer actually control your keys to, technically. And so then you try and set a limit order and like sell it or a buy order, and you say like when something's at this price I'm going to buy it, or when something's at this price I'm going to sell it. And so this user called Spoofy has a ton of cryptocurrency, a ton of Bitcoin and other altcoins and stuff, and will set these ridiculously high either buy orders or sell orders. And because the market's so small and this person is holding so much, they can actually drive up the market up or down. And it's unclear who this person is and like, or a group of people that could be. But if like let's say someone tried to, that's like if you did that on the Wall Street stock exchange, like your traditional stock exchange, that's illegal. So like you can't do that on Wall Street, but people are doing it and do it all the time on different exchanges, and that will affect the value of something. And so there's a problem, that's problematic.
So when an exchange goes wonky like that, and it seems like somebody is able to one wallet is able to manipulate that whole exchange, do people have the ability to just pick up and leave that exchange, like abandon that exchange, or do people stay on? Are they forced to stay on, or do they stay on in order to take advantage of a riotous market or whatever? ride the waves?
No, they absolutely can go. There's tons of exchanges all over the world. There's a lot. And so, yeah, they absolutely can just go somewhere else. And in fact, some exchanges you can't just use like unlike Coinbase, actually, a lot of exchanges refuse to deal in fiat currency. And so you have to either be holding Bitcoin or Ethereum to buy some of these other altcoins in exchange for some of these other altcoins and stuff. But yeah, you absolutely can. If something's going on an exchange, you absolutely can just move your stuff to a different exchange.
It's so funny that you call them
Are you
altcoins,
there?
and I'm sure that that's like system wide or whatever. But
Yeah.
another interesting aspect in this boom is this boom in alt currencies, as you say, is the apparent rise in use of cryptocurrencies by the far or alt right. And their investments leading to crypto windfalls in recent months. An article by Jack Smith on Mike.com, which was entitled "Neo-Nazi Wealth is Growing Rapidly. Why? Bitcoin," describes this change. From your vantage point, what seems to be happening?
So, particularly after Charlottesville, what happened was a lot of these alt-right and neo-Nazi groups started getting deplatformed off of their payment systems like PayPal and other stuff. And so what happened was, and I think the far right was kind of always to some degree kind of up on the cryptocurrency realm, at least like all the kind of 4chan, 8chan trolls were, but even more so that because they didn't have a way to get payment conventionally, they turned to more unconventional methods like Bitcoin and altcoins. And so as they've been holding them over time, the value of Bitcoin has been going up. So because that was the only way they could get payments, they were getting those payments and then holding them, and then those payments went up. It's kind of basically, they're holding this basically investment tool, which Bitcoin is, and it's been profitable for them, unfortunately.
So they've been in some ways like chased out of one place, and so of course they've set up shop somewhere else.
Yep. And that's kind of what's happened. And so now they're holding it. And so the way that people know what they're holding in this case versus like if a neo-Nazi or alt-right group was just holding, let's say, just money or cash in a bank, is that we couldn't just go to the bank and demand that we know how much they're holding. But because they're holding it in Bitcoin, now this isn't going to be true of every altcoin they're holding, but in the case of Bitcoin, it's true that you can just go to the blockchain with the address that they've listed on their website to be like, hey, donate to us and give us some money here at this Bitcoin address. And so you just go look that Bitcoin address up on the blockchain and you can see what they're holding. And so I think that's like one interesting nuance about this whole cryptocurrency situation is that like if you tell people what your wallet address is, you can look up what people are holding on the blockchain. So that's how people found that out, and that's how that Twitter bot that's also in that article that you mentioned is able to find that out.
So that Twitter bot was produced by John Bambanek, and it's entitled "At Neo-Nazi Wallets," and it was an algorithm that was created to specifically follow the transactions with known public neo-Nazis. But it doesn't say anything necessarily about who's giving the donations. It's just saying something about the places they're going, right?
Right. So, and that's the thing. So, if just some wallet that no one's ever posted publicly gives some Bitcoin to, Richard Spencer's Bitcoin wallet, you wouldn't necessarily know who was giving it to Richard Spencer. You would just know that Richard Spencer got it, and you would see, maybe if Richard Spencer pulled money out, you would see money leaving to some other wallet address, but you wouldn't know who that was unless that person publicly said, this is my wallet address.
Bambanek talks in that article that I mentioned, that you pointed me to actually, about the next steps being going into more detail, finding, now that they've found some of these trajectories of exchange, trying to find more detailed and nuanced information as relates to large events or large investments that are public or whatever, to sort of map out these transactions and who maybe these hidden donors are. Is that right?
Yeah. So, with research, I bet it would be possible to find out who some of these people are, depending on what they've said online.
So you mentioned that a lot of people that have gone into cryptocurrencies who are Nazis or white supremacists or whatever have been like deplatformed from PayPal and from Apple Pay in the same way that, far left and anti-fascist and anarchist projects have also been deplatformed from things like Patreon or PayPal. WikiLeaks was taken off of PayPal. Visa refused to accept payments for them and process payments for them. It seems like a double-edged sword. But there's another article that you also pointed me to, which is awesome, called Nazi #fail is a sign the fascists are morphing on idavox.com, which is a great website. And that article talks about the deplatforming. Like, how does that happen? If we find out that, in this case, neo-Nazis are using this money and what they're using it for, if we can pinpoint those transactions and connect them to, say, like renting the vans in Charlottesville or what have you, how could one go about trying to deplatform the alt-right from those platforms?
From cryptocurrency?
Yeah, from certain wallet services.
I think that kind of remains to be seen right now. I mean, outside of like some just crazy hacking, I'm not really sure, but I think, I think you bring up a good point about how some other like anarchist and anti-fascist groups were, also running into this payment system problem. Is that, that this is a way that social movements, whether they're peaceful or militant, there's a very real need for people to be able to acquire and hold resources. And right now, in a situation where, PayPal can cut funding based on, right-wing trolls complaining about anti-fascist groups and stuff like that, it becomes like, well, how are, these groups are going to need to be able to acquire resources and funds, and, social movements and revolutionary struggles going forward are going to need to be able to do that. And it's become clear that the powers that be, the corporations and the banks, will actually shut down those methods of payment. And so one thing that cryptocurrency does allow, and I think does give some of these social movements a chance to be able to actually hold their funds, and no one can like stop that. And so the downside is that that's also true for neo-Nazi groups. So I don't know, but if you want to be able to receive funds, like there's no service that can just step in and tell someone that they can't give or receive Bitcoins, like to my knowledge. And that does have to do with the encryption aspect of it. And so someone can send you stuff and someone can receive stuff, and there's no bank or government that can really supersede that. And so other things to think about with the potentials of cryptocurrency, recently, actually, I think it was a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, Cyprus had capital controls. They were having some financial problems from the related financial crisis, and they had capital controls, right? And so what that meant is that if you wanted to try and go to your ATM with capital controls, you can't just go to the bank and pull your money out. Like there's capital controls, that's it. The banks are shut down. Maybe they don't want to run on the banks, whatever. If you're holding Bitcoin, you'd actually still have your currency if you were in a country that all of a sudden had capital controls. And so that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about, and this is kind of less likely, but possible, if you're a refugee fleeing a country and you were able somehow to hold cryptocurrencies or Bitcoins, and you were able to flee with that, you could actually leave with at least some of like the wealth that, you had, which a lot of times refugees are just fleeing with nothing because they absolutely aren't given anything. And so there's that. And then, another thing to think about is that cryptocurrencies can shield you from inflation as well. So the Federal Reserve does a thing called quantitative easing, where they basically just print money that's not backed by anything and flood that into our financial system. And really what gives it value at this point is that people are just willing to still work for it. But what that does with, any money you're saving is that actually makes that money worth less. So in a way, it's like a hidden tax that you're dealing with inflation. And so in countries where that's wildly out of control right now, like Honduras or Zimbabwe, some people have actually been turning to cryptocurrencies just because they want to be able to preserve what wealth they had. So, if you worked, you got a little bit of money, and then you put that into Bitcoin, and then inflation sets in, you actually have shielded whatever wealth you put in from Bitcoin from inflation.
But doesn't not inflation exactly, but there are, based on the amount of users using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, that changes the value of each investment in Bitcoin, right? So it's not like it's like some stable, there's only so much gold in the world and therefore the gold is worth this much. Doesn't that fluctuate?
And so there are actually to date over 1,200 cryptocurrencies and increasing. But as far as Bitcoin goes, there are other kinds of payment system that aren't based in scarcity, and unfortunately, cryptocurrencies are. And so there's a conversation missing there, because there's a lot of problems with scarcity based like economics. But there's only going to be so many of a certain cryptocurrency, and in most cases it's set up that like some company or something can't just issue more of them. And so yeah, it is very volatile and there's a ton of risk. Even just holding Bitcoin involves a lot of risk. But and it does have to do with like people's perceptions of Bitcoin, and what's going on with it, and how many people are buying it or selling it, or what the demand is. Like that will affect things. But if you're the general trend right now has been that like Bitcoin will go up a little bit, it'll go down, but over time it's gone up in value. And that could change. There's tons of argument about whether Bitcoin's a bubble or whether this is like the future of currency. It's still very unclear. But if you're in a country and you want to be able to actually shield your wealth, actually Bitcoin can be a good tool even for long-term storing of wealth. And so like I personally don't trade day to day. I just hold it. And over time, my holdings have gone up in value. But there are people who will just actually sit there and trade on the little micro dips all day long.
So to sort of jump back to the conversation about the alt-right and investment in cryptocurrency, that same IDAVOX opinion piece that I pointed to by Lucy McCauley, it goes on to talk about how our self-funded movement, as in like the movement of liberation or the movement of the left or the anti-authoritarian left or whatever, is having to compete with the far right's reserves of capitalist loot. And we're already set up against, like, traditionally governments will support reactionary conservative movements. That's how it goes. And capital tends to want the stability, or what they see as stability, in conservative or reactionary movements. But in your opinion, is there room for or good reason for us to seek a similar funding scheme using cryptocurrency to feed our movement needs and build infrastructures that we'll need for autonomy and resistance?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the only thing that these movements should do, but yeah, I do. I think there's potential here, um, for a lot of things. And I mean, one way I would say, to kind of go back to what we're talking about again, is autonomy. And part of autonomy means that you're able to not have to rely on these kind of payment authority systems, whether that's a bank or PayPal or Patreon. And so what we're seeing now is more increased adoption of cryptocurrency users. And so as that becomes normalized, that actually kind of gives you a certain amount of autonomy to at least be able to like receive something of value and hold it. And really no one can take that away from you, I guess, except for like at gunpoint. And so I think there's that. I think it's also something that you can literally send or receive from anywhere in the world. And as far as internationalism goes, I think that goes a long way. And I do know that the YPG and the Rojava project do accept cryptocurrencies.
So an untraceable, an ideally somewhat untraceable donation could be made to something that, yeah, state governments don't necessarily recognize, even if they'll send a few small arms into their hands to fight ISIS.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I'm sure ISIS was accepting cryptocurrency too.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
and oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean that's the other thing is that for better or worse, these other groups are doing this, and this does erode a certain amount of power with the banks, but it also allows them to also possibly manipulate a lot of these markets, and so they're also doing that, and so it's unclear. I think cryptocurrency and Bitcoin are like hailed as this completely like anti-authoritarian financial product. And I think there's some truth to that, but I think there's also some uncertainty, especially with how small the market actually is when these large scale investment firms and companies and other things come online. The other thing we haven't talked about is futures trading started on 2 major exchanges. And so futures trading is basically just betting on the price of Bitcoin. And so now this just happened with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the CBOE, whichever exchange that is. So instead of just investing in Bitcoin, you can now actually just basically take bets on whether or not the cost of Bitcoin will go up and down. And it's really problematic for cryptocurrencies because, you know, it doesn't seem very clear that the founders would have wanted the people who actually invented Bitcoin and started Bitcoin. It's like, I don't know if that's actually what they would have wanted. And that even opens up the situation, even more manipulation. And if you think back to the whole derivatives mortgage crisis that was going on, I mean, it's kind of a similar situation. And so that's pretty problematic. And a lot of people in the kind of cryptocurrency realm are not excited about Bitcoin futures being traded and coming online. And actually, as we speak right now, one of the markets crashed right now.
One of the Bitcoin exchanges?
No, one of the it's like this. So the CME and the CBOE are like actual financial exchanges. They're like mainstream financial exchanges. They're not like a cryptocurrency exchange. And so they're trading on futures, which are basically just bets on that people can take whether or not they hold Bitcoin or not. You can just take a bet on whether it'll go up this much or go down this much. And so, but that opens up to manipulation because people who are holding it could be, you know, trying to do this or that. It's kind of a similar thing with that whole spoofy situation.
So this is like an example of it less the interaction with. I mean, currency exchange is a thing, and people will hedge bets on that, on how a currency is going to do. But it's sort of Bitcoin as a product as opposed to as a medium for exchange, right?
Yeah, basically, they kind of trade on it as if it were a stock.
Yeah, that's insane. That's way out of my pay range.
Yeah, and I know I don't know very much about Wall Street trading, and I don't particularly like it either. But yeah, so there, I mean, there's that aspect of it. I'm trying to think of the other kind of like murky, weird things that seem like pretty unclear.
So with like stocks or whatever, a lot of people that do trading on stocks don't know necessarily who the other investors are, or don't necessarily care so much, don't necessarily do it based on an ethical basis, but based on how they think the market is doing and how it's going to react. So it takes ethics out of investment of resources. And that's a reason that a lot of us anti-capitalists have an irksome reaction to market economies as an idea or as a positive solution to social needs, is because it actually ignores human needs or turns those into elements that determine wealth. Then getting back to what you said about like scarcity models for economies, like in some ways it definitely benefits rich people that there are so many people that don't have access to the resource. Like that's the very basic for economics, is denial of the ability to survive. But stepping back from that, I guess, like how much like investing in Bitcoin, how much are you engaging in supporting shady deals that you might be ethically opposed to, like human trafficking or sex slavery?
How much am I contributing to those by just holding cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, or not you personally specifically, but like how much?
Well, how much you could be in theory?
Yeah.
Well, so one thing I would say, and I think it's kind of been somewhat unfair for cryptocurrencies, is that there's been like this association of cryptocurrencies as like the drug of, or the, you know, the currency of like drug smuggling and human trafficking and such. And while some of that did happen, and there's definitely like a lot of scandalous stuff where people who did do stuff like that use cryptocurrencies, by and large, those industries have been funded by fiat currency and still are on a much larger basis. So I mean, there's that to think about.
Yeah, you're not tracing the serial number of every dollar bill that exchanges hands
Right.
between people that are like acting as coyotes on the border.
Right. Right. Exactly. And so, I mean, I guess I would say it's in that regard, I would say that cryptocurrency is every bit is unethical, but no more unethical than any other financial means that we're currently using.
So here's, I wanted to bring up an example, like an interesting example that I had heard of recently. This is going to be kind of a long winded read, but zooming out. A recent development in the left landscape of the U.S. has been to take on threads of Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow and run it through the realities brought to national attention by the uprising in Ferguson and other cities around the country that lay bare the connection between race, poverty, and incarceration and violence. So, huge proportions of America's lower classes, of whom a disproportionate number are people of color, are caught in a poverty cycle exacerbated by the prison industrial complex's money bail system, many serving in jails only for the lack of money to get out on bail. There's a direct relationship also between pressure on families to survive with less breadwinners being inside for bail reasons, as well as the likelihood of people to take a plea just to get out of jail and have that weight of conviction around their necks moving forward for the rest of their lives. Another use of cryptocurrency that I've heard of recently that I thought was pretty interesting was a team up between thenewinquiry.com with the Bronx Freedom Fund to create an app known as Bailbloc to mine Monero, digital currency, to be donated to the BFF's coffers. And the hope with this money is that, along with other projects through grant writing that they're trying to formulate, is to set up chapters in different cities around the country for these bail release funds. They get the money, whether it be through these cryptocurrency mining operations or through donations. They hold it in a reserve. They research and start letting out some of the most marginalized people that are stuck in on bail, while awaiting trial, and get them out and circulating back into the real world, and thus decreasing recidivism or decreasing that negative economic, social, and psychological and material impact on their communities. Can you think of any other schemes that are kind of like that are inspirational in terms of smart ways that people are using these technologies?
I did hear of, I forgot which part of Europe, but I did hear that they're actually, what your example is probably the coolest example I've ever heard. And I actually had never heard of that example until now. So that's way awesome. And that is the kind of stuff I'm talking about as far as like the potentials of what could be done with some of these currencies emerging. Not necessarily Bitcoin, but altcoins and cryptocurrency. Another one I heard of a mining operation that's hydropowered. It's somewhere in Europe. I forgot which one. On that, I haven't heard of a ton of stuff. Really, it's hard to say. The reality is that a lot of altcoins that are coming out have different technology, and that actually, to some degree, has to do with like what people perceive its value as. I think your example is a great example of actually positive things that could be done with some of this crypto technology that's coming out.
So jumping back to Monero that was brought up in that example, and because you did talk about like hydropowered, so currency, the Monero currency specifically claims to have a relatively low carbon footprint, which is one way of measuring something's impact on the environment, but it's not the only. For instance, creating hydroelectric projects in order to power or cool or what have you, a farm of computers that are mining a cryptocurrency to make a crypto or alt economy run, also has a physical impact on the ecosystems that they're placed in, and who has access to those resources in like meat space in IRL. But so can you talk about like the ecological impacts of, or some of the ecological impacts of cryptocurrencies as you're aware?
Yeah, so a lot of the ecological impacts that have to do with cryptocurrency, from what I can tell, have to do with the technology that's based in it and how they process their transactions. And so, for example, Bitcoin is 1 megabyte blockchain speed. Fork that came off of that called Bitcoin Cash was 8 megabytes because they said that Bitcoin was too slow. But that means that the hardware is going to have to use more power to process that. So, that's a problem. I mean, other things to think about with cryptocurrency in general is like, I think only maybe 30% of the world has access to the internet. And I'm not even sure the percentage of people who have access to power. And so if if you're someone who lives in a country where you don't have access, the internet or even electricity, this kind of won't help you. I mean, if you absolutely don't have a dollar to your name, cryptocurrencies probably aren't going to help you. And so that's a problem. And I mean, hydroelectric power is problematic. I've heard of mining outfits that used like solar panels, and solar panels are problematic also because you have to mine to be able to get the material to make those. And that's also a limited resource, and that involves extraction. And so, I mean, there's a lot of problems on that front. There are some coins that don't use up as much. I guess it depends on how, if you feel that technology can innovate our way out of some of these situations or not. So there's that element of it too. But not every cryptocurrency has to be so energy wasteful. And some aren't, like Monero.
So we talked a little bit about some of the other alt currencies, which you've called forks from Bitcoin. And I don't know that Bitcoin was necessarily even the first, but in programming lingo, when referring to roads or with rivers, forks split from main bodies in motion or are transit points from main bodies and tend to be smaller as a product going along these new vectors. As you understand, why do cryptocurrencies split or fork? What sorts of, besides having different uses of resources in the real world to process them or to make, why do people do this?
So a forked coin is where, let's say, for example, you're holding, and this has actually happened in the past few months, you were holding Bitcoin, right? And so the people who mine Bitcoin and the people who are like the developers or the core programmers or whatever have to have meetings where they deal with each other and come to consensus about what they want. And there's a lot of politics involved back and forth in the case of Bitcoin between the miners and the developers, which has affected like energy consumption and the transaction speed. And people have had a lot of debates about like what Bitcoin was intended to do and what it's doing currently. And so what will happen is sometimes people, when groups can't come to consensus or the developers, have decided, I mean, maybe just like a splinter group of developers have decided that they're going to fork off of Bitcoin. And so that's different than an altcoin. An altcoin would just basically release through a thing called an ICO, or an initial coin offering, and people would basically go and buy this new coin that the company was debuting, right? And that's not a fork. That's just you're just buying a new altcoin. And there's a lot of problems with ICOs too, which we actually should talk about. But so with a fork, you're only holding it. So what they do is they take a snapshot of the blockchain and all the wallets that were holding Bitcoin at the time. The forked coin then issues to those wallets this new currency also. And usually that currency will be like, in the case of Bitcoin Cash, which happened a few months ago, that currency is 8 times faster, but way more inefficient and uses more processing power for miners. And so you'd be issued that coin for free. So whatever amount of Bitcoin you were holding, you got this new coin for free. And so the new coin might not be worth the same amount as the Bitcoin you were holding, but it's, in some cases, it's still worth a couple $100. And so you basically, if you're holding a coin that forks, you'll be issued the other forked coin for free. And it comes when basically core developers can't come to consensus and decide what they want to do moving forward. So some of them are like, we're just gonna branch off and start a new currency. It can also happen when the amount of developers or miners or whatever don't update their software. And so that actually happened with Ethereum, split into Ethereum Classic also, or actually basically a bunch of developers or miners or whatever didn't update their software, and it caused an accidental split. And so that's basically the difference. I don't know if that's clear or whatever.
Yeah, I think that makes
But
sense. So are you using the phrases developer, programmer, and miner in exchange with each other? Are they
not, I mean, like, right, I was for a second there, but no, they're different. So like they have to deal. So, and I don't understand this part of it, but I know that there's developers for each of the currencies and there's miners, and they have to like have meetings about how they're going to do this because if you have a cryptocurrency, you need miners who are going to, process these transactions, because otherwise your currency won't function anymore if you can't send it or receive it. And without miners, you can't do that. And so they kind of have to come to these political meetings, and I'm sure you have plenty of experience with, kind of more horizontal organizing, and coming to consensus can be pretty difficult,
Oh, yeah.
a lot. And so they're actually kind of running into the same issue. And then some people are like, well, we're just going to break off then and do our own currency. And so, and then that'll come, and then other miners will have to switch, and miners often do switch their software or whatever to a different currency if it's profitable. But it's got to be profitable. And, with miners, they have to consider like their energy consumption and paying for that, and their hardware and like general upkeep. And that's got to be worthwhile for them to do in order for the currency to have transactions on it. You need this whole pool of miners who will process these transactions. And if you piss those people off, then they can't actually just leave and go to some other currency and process that.
So I mean, this is kind of Adam Smithian, I think, right? You've got this triangle, this economic triangle of owner, worker, and consumer, and they have relationships with each other and try to keep some sort of balance in whatever economy we're talking about. Is that like a comparable situation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Except I would say there's, depending on the currency, there's less of that dynamic. So like there's no one company that owns Bitcoin, and a lot of these cryptocurrencies are open source. And so there are companies who like are involved with like developing it, but there's no like one company that would like control it per se. But there's companies that are involved with like the open source development that have an influence.
So what are the problems with ICOs?
So the problem with ICOs, and so again, an ICO is called an initial coin offering, and it's when a company debuts, or a group of like developers debut a new currency, and they are trying to get people to invest in it and basically give money for the currency itself when it's released, or tokens that will later get you the currency. But essentially, they're asking for people to come and buy this new currency that they're releasing. And people do it all the time. And there are people who invest in them and people who end up making a lot of money investing in them. But the other problem is that there's coins called pump and dumps, right? So someone starts like basically a fake ICO, or makes a website that's basically like hyping up this technology around their currency, because they all kind of purport to do different stuff, and they're kind of, supposedly used for different things. So when trying to figure out how to explain this. So they'll do a release of it, right? Now, if it's like a legitimate currency that people are going to care about, that people are going to use, then it might not be bad to have some. But in a lot of cases, people just kind of make up some fake ICOs, get people to give them a huge cash injection, and then the coin tanks. And so anyone who was holding those coins ends up losing a bunch of money, and the people who are doing the ICO, or the company, ends up gaining a bunch of money. And they without the intention of ever actually really trying to have a cryptocurrency that was going to work or going to function in any real way. It's basically a scam. So there's a lot of ICOs out there that act like they're actually going to be a legit altcoin cryptocurrency technology. Ask people to invest in their ICOs, because you can get some of those new coins you can get for pennies on the dollar. And so some people want to invest in that, and a lot of times they turn out to be fake, or like pump and dumps. And so usually that happens because the people who are debuting the coin want to make a bunch of money and don't actually care about the coin like doing well or whatever. So that's
Is
the problem with ICOs, is they're scammy.
is there a possibility of blowback with someone doing that? Like, what do you, because this technology isn't regulated by state systems, besides getting a bad name if your name's attached to the ICO, Is there a repercussion?
Like there can be, but sometimes there's not. And sometimes like people don't even know who actually did the ICO, or like the person's in some country, where nothing's going to happen to them. Or, I mean, there's been quite a few instances where people have done some stuff and then nothing's ever even happened to them about it. And so, yeah, I mean, there could be zero repercussions if something like that happens. And even coins with good technology sometimes will tank. So, and I would say actually most altcoins, especially the ones in like the top 50 most traded, a lot of those have better technology than Bitcoin, but people are just investing in Bitcoin right now because that's like a big hot button word. And a lot of these altcoins are actually, they're faster, they use less power, they have better uses. Some of them are even more secure, actually anonymous. But people, there's this kind of irrationality that goes on with, the trading of cryptocurrencies. And, so people are still messing with Bitcoin, even though, I mean, it was one of the first to have the kind of adoption that it had. But, it has a lot of problems. And like I said, the political problems with the miners and the developers and stuff, in some ways, depending on who you ask, has actually hindered their ability to develop the technology further. And so now you're seeing some of these other like altcoins kind of creep up and people take interest in those. And so there's that whole aspect of it also. You could have a legitimate coin, hold it, and you could lose a lot of money depending on what you put in.
So, can you point listeners to any good resources for learning more about cryptocurrencies, like any websites or I don't know, like any social media sites that are up on it and posting good articles, or any books?
There's actually so much information online that I honestly couldn't even tell you where to start. I mean, there's so many YouTuber channels and stuff available online. I guess I would actually be hesitant to really point at any one thing, because a lot of people who are talking about this online and doing this also aren't necessarily professionals and done this for a long time. And there's so much speculation involved when talking about the technology around cryptocurrencies, whether or not you should buy and all that, that it would really be hard. I mean, there's so much risk involved that I would be hesitant to point anyone at any one place. But you can actually monitor the real-time analytics of cryptocurrencies at a website called coinmarketcap.com, and it will list them in order of the most traded, every single currency, which I believe is over 1,200 now. Yeah, and you can see all of those. And so that's a great place to start. I use an exchange, Coinbase, for first-time users. That's a good place to look. There's also a free app you can get on your phone called Blockfolio, and that will actually allow you to punch in if you have any cryptocurrency holdings, your holdings, to see how those are doing, or just watch a coin and get specific analytics about that. There's also a little news aggregator app on there, which I've found very helpful, and you can check that out. But those are all free tools that you can do. I guess the only other thing I would say about cryptocurrencies for those who are interested and might be discouraged is that, like, Bitcoin's worth like $15,400 right now. And as far as anyone like going first time investing, don't invest something you wouldn't be willing to lose. But you can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. You don't need to buy a whole one to be able to, protect your wealth, or even possibly make a little money, or just be able to hold something long term. So I think that's like the wrong attitude to have. Like, even if a coin is expensive, you can still hold fractions of it. And so, if all you have is $50, or even $10 to hold some cryptocurrency, a little bit here and there, you can actually do that. And depending on what you do, you could still actually like hold money or like make money.
Are there any resources that you would tell people to shy away from? Are there any like tropes of bad information sources that, like, if this site starts talking about this sort of thing, or like obviously if they offer you stuff for free, that's likely a scam, just like with everything else in the world. But are there any scams to like be aware of? Any Nigerian princes?
I mean, ICOs basically, The other things to worry about is basically there's a lot of mainstream financial interest, some of which is starting to be involved in Bitcoin, is pretty skeptical of Bitcoin. And so any kind of like Wall Street banker or certain corporate CEOs are probably going to say things about cryptocurrencies. And a lot of times they're saying that actually because it helps them financially to say that, or they're concerned that some of these cryptocurrencies are going to like erode the power they have established. And I think the potential for that is there right now, but we'll see. I guess the only other scam I'd worry about is don't hold your cryptocurrencies on your hard drive on your computer or your phone, because you could get it hacked. So another thing to think about, actually, we didn't bring this up, is the IRS and claiming cryptocurrency with the IRS. But one thing that the IRS recently said is that cryptocurrencies are considered property in the eyes of the IRS. And so they expect you to declare them, but I'm not sure if that's when you cash out or what. And so that happened. And so actually another thing that happened with Coinbase in the past few weeks is, so in 2015, only like 800 people actually declared their cryptocurrency holdings with the IRS. And so the IRS has been going after Coinbase, which is actually based in the UK, like I said, and wants to know any user information. And Coinbase told them no. But then Coinbase went back and said that they would give them any user information about anyone who either bought or cashed out $20,000 worth of US currency. And so those user profiles were handed over to the IRS, even though it's an exchange that's in the UK. And so it's unclear how the IRS, I think the IRS is possibly threatened by calling cryptocurrency an actual currency. And so it might be taxed along with as like property with anything else. But they are starting to expect people to declare their holdings. And that's been a large moral debate within the cryptocurrency community as to whether or not the IRS has the right to know what cryptocurrencies you're holding or not.
One very important point about cryptocurrencies that you didn't bring up, and I'm a little surprised, is the fact that Unicorn Riot accepts a number of cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, we do.
Well, I hope that people appreciate this conversation and found it as educational as I did, but I hope that wasn't too shilly. That was weird.
No, that's okay. But interestingly, we can actually only hold Bitcoin, but so that what's on our donation page is another exchange called Shapeshift, mm-hmm. and that will just actually transfer the currency into Bitcoin.
Oh.
And so we can accept a bunch of cryptos, but we can only hold Bitcoin, which we're going to try and change here soon.
Well, Pat, thank you so much for this chat, and I hope people go do some exploring and do some innovation, and also definitely, I can't suggest enough that they check out both the social media feeds for Unicorn Riot, but also the site, and check out the videos, the awesome investigations, and the awesome media that y'all produce. And thanks a lot for taking the time to research this stuff and share.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks, Burst, for having me on. I appreciate it.
If you'd like to hear more of these chats or our weekly radio show on anarchist actions and ideas, check out thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org.
Hide the planet! Hide the planet!
Shut up and get in the car!
Hide the planet! Hide the planet!